scare easily. After years of watching horror movies and reading scary stories, I thought I was pretty much immune to being frightened. But what I experienced during my hike that day proved me wrong. It started off as a beautiful Saturday morning, the perfect weather for going on a nature walk. I packed my backpack with some snacks and water and headed out to one of my favorite trails. It was nice to get away from the city and into the peaceful green woods. About an hour into my hike, things started to feel a little off. I hadn't passed a single person on the trail, which was unusual for a weekend. The woods were dead silent, no birds chirping, no squirrels scampering around. The only sound was the soft crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots. I shook away the uneasy feeling and continued along the narrow dirt path, but I couldn't ignore the prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I picked up my pace, hoping to reach the end of the trail soon. That's when I heard it. A dark, raspy whisper from right behind me. "Where are you going?" It croaked. I whipped around, heart pounding. No one was there. The woods were as empty as before. I must be losing it, I thought nervously. But I couldn't shake that whisper from my mind. It had sounded so close, as if someone was standing inches away. A violent shudder passed through me. I walked even faster, nearly jogging down the winding trail. Then I saw it, a dilapidated cabin tucked away in the trees just off the path. Its weathered wooden walls were covered in creeping ivy. The windows were darkened with dirt and dust. Clearly no one had lived there for years. I hoped. As I passed by, the front door slowly creaked open. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood straight up as I stared, mesmerized at that ominous open doorway. A dense, impenetrable darkness lurked inside the cabin, and then, very faintly, I heard it. A raspy giggling coming from the inky blackness within. That was enough for me. I took off running, stumbling over rocks and branches, desperate to get as far away from that nightmarish cabin as possible. My mind spun with terrifying imaginations of what might be inside, making that awful laughter. Eventually, I had to stop and catch my breath. As my panic subsided, I felt a little ridiculous getting so scared. It was probably just some local kids playing a prank trying to freak out hikers like myself. Still, my hands shook slightly as I unscrewed my water bottle and took a long drink. After walking a bit further, the path opened up onto an old wooden bridge crossing a narrow creek. I was almost back to the parking lot. Just over this bridge, and another half-mile down the trail, I stepped onto the weathered planks, rotten in spots with age. I was halfway across when a cold blast of air swept over me. The woods suddenly went deathly silent, like someone had hit mute. The hairs on my arms stood at attention again, and then I heard it from below the bridge, a gurgling, choking noise, like something drowning, or trying to breathe with water in its lungs. My muscles locked in panic. Some primal instinct told me not to look, not to acknowledge the thing under the bridge. Keep moving. Get out of here. Don't let it know you hear it. The gurgling ceased. Holding my breath, I increased my pace across the bridge. Almost there. A splintering crack exploded beneath me as a section of rotten wood broke off, nearly tumbling me into the dark water below. At the same moment, dozens of crows erupted from the surrounding trees, cawing raucously. Wings flapped all around me in a frantic tornado of black feathers. I felt sharp talons graze my scalp. Dropping my pack, I sprinted the last few yards down the bridge, the shrieks of agitated crows echoing through the woods. Nearly hyperventilating, I emerged from the tree line and dashed into the parking lot. As I fumbled to unlock my car, I shot panicked glances over my shoulder, half expecting something to come lurching out of the woods towards me. Like an emaciated figure dripping with creek water, tangled hair shrouding its face, reaching for me with swollen, decomposing hands. I peeled out of the parking lot in record time, blasting the AC to fight the cold sweat, soaking my skin. Chest heaving, I tried to rationalize away the bizarre, terrifying things I'd seen and heard on what was supposed to be an ordinary nature walk. When I got home, I poured myself a double shot of whiskey, even though it was only noon. I needed something strong to steady my nerves. That trail was scratched off my list. I'd find somewhere else to hike from now on. Somewhere a lot less creepy. I shook my head sharply, rubbing my tired eyes. I must be even more exhausted than I realized. My imagination had conjured up the creepiest, most vivid daydream during that hike. The empty woods, the abandoned cabin, that thing under the bridge. It had all seemed so frighteningly real. I laughed weakly, my laugh tinged with a hint of lingering fear. Because despite what logic told me, some small part of my mind kept nagging. What if it wasn't just my imagination? I always considered myself a rational person. One who didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or things that go bump in the night. That changed after I stayed at the remote mountain lodge last fall. I was on a solo hiking trip, trying to clear my head after a messy breakup. The winding forest trails led me deep into the wilderness, farther than I'd ever been. As dusk fell on the second day, I realized I'd never make it back before nightfall. I spotted a narrow path through the trees and followed it to a large clearing, where stood a ramshackle 2-story lodge. The painted sign read Mountain Inn and Tavern, vacancies. Homey lamps glowed in the windows, smoke wisping from the stone chimney. I hesitated. Showing up alone at a remote hotel was risky, but freezing outdoors was worse. I trudged up the creaky steps and entered the old-fashioned lobby. Oil paintings and antique furniture filled the space. An elderly man emerged from the back room. He greeted me with a smile that seemed friendly enough, introducing himself as Walter, the innkeeper. I requested a room for the night. His eyes glinting and led me upstairs by candlelight. I felt his gaze lingering as we walked down the narrow hallway. Walter showed me to a small corner room containing a bed, dresser, and little else. I bid him good night and locked the door. The wind howled outside as I peered out my frosty window. The inn sat at the edge of the forest, bathed in silver moonlight. The utter stillness sent a lonely chill through my bones. I crawled beneath the feather comforter, seeking sleep to distract my restless mind. Just as I drifted off, a loud bang jolted me upright. Heart racing, I scanned the room and spotted a photo frame lying face down on the dresser. Strange, it must have fallen somehow. I replaced it and sank back onto the pillow, pulling the covers tight around me. Sleep soon overtook me again until, creak, my eyes flew open. The rocking chair by the door was slowly moving back and forth. I shook away the knot of fear in my stomach, certain I must be dreaming. But I wasn't asleep, and the chair kept rocking. Creak, back and forth, back and forth. Panic swelled inside me. Ghosts didn't exist, did they? Before I could scramble out of bed, everything went still and quiet. The chair sat motionless once again. After what felt like hours staring wide-eyed into the darkness, I reluctantly closed my eyes. I awakened well before sunrise, unrested. My watch read 5 a.m. Still too early to begin hiking. As I sat up groggily, something else caught my eye. On the nightstand were 3 long scratches carved deeply into the wood. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't done that, and I still wore all my fingernails. Then I noticed something bulging under the comforter beside me. My chest clenched. I slowly lifted the blanket with trembling fingers. There lay a small, weathered doll with tangled black yarn for hair. Her glassy eyes stared up at me, 2 drops of blood dripping from her ghostly pale mouth. I leapt from the bed with a gasp, my heart threatening to pound through my ribs. This couldn't be real. I must be losing my mind. Oversleeping and imagining things in this strange place. I grabbed my pack and boots, dressing hurriedly. As I laced my last shoe, a child's shrill cry pierced the air. Then maniacal laughter. Low, twisted, inhuman laughter right outside my bedroom door. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The doorknob slowly began to rattle back and forth. someone, or something, was trying to get inside. Still crouched on the floor, I glanced wildly around the room for an escape route. My only choice was to climb out the window onto a perilously narrow stone ledge. As the rattling grew violent and the shrieks turned demonic, I threw open the window and scrambled out in blind panic. The 20-foot drop made my head spin, but going back inside seemed far worse. I inched along the ledge beneath the moon's pale glow until I reached a rusty old fire escape. I leapt over the rail just as a bony hand smashed the glass behind me, grasping through jagged shards. I hit the ground hard, my ankles screaming in protest. Hobbling to the tree line, I hazarded a glance back at the inn. A small, shadowy face pressed against my shattered window, peering out with a truly sadistic grin. Revulsion gripped me. I limped into the woods as swiftly as possible, putting distance between me and that nightmarish place. I hiked 5 agonizing miles before collapsing, mentally and physically spent. When I finally emerged from the forest, I swore to never speak of those horrors again. The rational part of my mind still denies what I witnessed. It must have been sleep deprivation, a waking nightmare. But when I close my eyes, I still glimpse that malevolent smile stretching wider and wider. I can still hear the spine-chilling laughter creeping up behind me. It happened on a night much like tonight. I was alone in my apartment, curtains drawn, doors locked, just trying to relax after a long day. As I sank into the couch, eyes glued to some mindless show on TV, a sharp noise made me jump. Tap, tap, tap. I paused the TV and listened closely. Silence. I laughed at myself for being so jittery over a random sound. It was an old building. Noises happened. I was about to hit play when it happened again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. A cold feeling trickled down my neck. Someone was at the door. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. Were they already gone, or were they hiding just out of sight? My pulse quickened. I double-checked the lock and chain just to be safe, then retreated back into the apartment. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself. I took a few deep breaths to calm my nerves. As I exhaled, a floorboard creaked right behind me. I whirled around with a gasp. No one there. No more sounds followed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I roamed around, turning on more lights, constantly glancing over my shoulder, even though each room was empty. Finally, I sank onto my bed, exhausted from anxiety. As my eyelids grew heavy, I convinced myself I'd imagined the earlier sounds. Just sleep deprivation playing tricks, nothing more. I turned off the bedside lamp and nestled under the covers, ready to let sleep take me far away from this eerie night. As I drifted off, a deafening crash jolted me upright. Heart pounding, I stared wildly into the darkness. Had a window broken? Had an intruder gotten inside? I rushed to flick on the lights, but they wouldn't turn on. With a growing sense of dread, I realized the power had gone out. I wanted desperately to think it was just a faulty circuit breaker, but I couldn't ignore the sinister atmosphere that permeated the blacked-out apartment. It felt like unseen eyes were watching me from every corner. I blindly grabbed my phone and flipped on its flashlight, casting long shadows across the walls that seemed to stretch and contort into grotesque shapes. Cautiously, I tiptoed through the rooms, searching for the source of the earlier crash. In the living room, the TV lay smashed on the floor. But how? I knew no one had been in here. A violent gust of wind suddenly shook the building, making me jump again. The windows weren't open, but it almost felt like something was trying to get inside. Unsure what to do next, I stood paralyzed in place, ears straining, heart thudding. Then came the whisper, an unmistakable slithery whisper seeming to originate from directly behind me. "Let me in." I release a blood-curdling scream and drop my phone, the light disappearing as it clattered across the floor. Blind terror gripped me. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel the malice, the pure evil that shared this dark space with me. I wanted desperately to wake up from this nightmare. Hot tears streamed down my face as I choked back sobs. Then came the horrible dragging sound, like nails scratching their way up the wall I was pinned against. It was coming closer, closer, until I could sense its faded breath on the back of my neck. Without thinking, I darted away from that area, nearly tripping as I rushed for where I thought my front door was located. I had to escape, but I couldn't orient myself without any light. All I could do was stumble around, waving my arms wildly in front of me until they made contact with something solid. The kitchen counter. I crept along its edge, heading to where the apartment exit should be, when suddenly my fingers dipped into something wet and sticky. What was that? I tentatively sniffed my hand and nearly vomited. It smelled like rotten meat. At that moment, the deafening crash came again, right from the kitchen, the sound of glass bottles violently shattering. I recoiled in terror, slipping on the foul, mysterious liquid and crashing chin first into the tile floor. Dazed, I ran my hands across the smooth surface, hoping to find my phone again. That's when my heart stopped. Lying there inches from my face was a hand. A severed, rotting hand, fingers curled as if beckoning me to come closer. I screamed and scrambled backward. I had to get out. This couldn't be real. I staggered to my feet and felt my way to the front door. To my immense relief, it opened and I burst out into the hallway, flooding my vision with light. Gasping, shaking, I collapsed against the wall and broke down in tears. Neighbors started peeking out, muttering in confusion at the raving, hysterical woman weeping on the floor. As I tried to recount my story, I gazed back into my still, dark apartment. Through the sliver of space, I thought I saw a pair of glowing eyes peering out at me, before a swirl of shadows swallowed them from view. It was my first night alone in the new house. As I wandered the empty rooms, footsteps echoed off the bare walls while tree branches cast twisting shadows that set my imagination wandering. I chided myself for getting spooked over nothing. Didn't I want an adventure when I bought this secluded property? Night fell and I curled up on the living room floor with a book, using a flashlight to scan the pages. The wind picked up outside, howling through gaps in the walls. My eyes lifted from the page. Sure, I heard a new sound mixing in, almost like breathing. But that was silly, just my mind playing tricks in the late hour. I returned to my book, immersed in the story until a loud bang made me gasp and shine my flashlight beam across the room. Just a tree branch against the glass, nothing more. I sighed at my jittery state. Still, when the light began flickering, I felt a prickle of unease. A faulty bulb, I supposed, but combined with the unsettling noises. I wandered the house, ensuring all doors and windows were locked up tight, hoping that would soothe my unrest. But I still couldn't entirely shrug off the sense of not being alone here. I paused in the hallway as an odd smell hit my nostrils. Earth and moss and something more beneath it all. Familiar, yet difficult to place. The temperature dropped abruptly. I shivered, breath emerging in puffs of mist. The flashlight bulb exploded without warning, glass tinkling to the floor as darkness engulfed everything. Blindly, I felt my way down the hall back toward the living room, as the walls seemed to bend and curve oddly around me. When a warm glow became visible, I hurried desperately toward it. Had a neighbor spotted my snuffed-out house and come to help, but as I entered the room, it was empty, save for a few extinguished candles giving off thin wisps of smoke from their wicks. Unease pricked the back of my neck once more, a sense of unseen eyes tracking my movements. Just when I resolved to wait out the night locked securely in my bedroom, a strained wheezing sound emerged from the shadows in the hall. The breathing. Here all along, yet somehow much louder now. I stumbled away, skin prickling. As I groped for my phone, the screen abruptly lit up with a strange sight. An image of myself, sleeping on the living room floor, still curled around that book. As I watched, the image zoomed out slowly to reveal a figure standing over me, patches of mold colonizing its writhing form. I screamed and hurled the phone away. Terrified, I backed toward the front door, wanting only escape. Then I halted, trembling. Were those footsteps, creaking across warped floorboards, shuffling slowly nearer? The wheezing grated louder in my ears as clammy, damp air licked the back of my neck.